From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Pentagon shoots down another object in U.S. airspace, though details are still sparse, as the public gets more information on the Chinese balloon that was taken down on Monday. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell and columnist Kim Strassel. Let's begin with a clip of a Defense Department briefing that just happened a few moments ago, where spokesman Brigadier General Pat Ryder is describing an object that was just shot down by the U.S. military.
The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. U.S. Northern Command is beginning recovery operations now. U.S. Northern Command's Alaska Command coordinated the operation with assistance from the Alaska Air National Guard, Federal Aviation Administration, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have no further details about the object at this time, including any description of its capabilities, purpose, or origin. The object was about the size of a small car, so not similar in size or shape to the high-altitude surveillance balloon that was taken down off the coast of South Carolina on February 4.
That is obviously a pretty vague description. There's a line in the New York Times report that says the Pentagon spokesman was describing it as an object because that was the best description they had of it. But Kate, it does suggest that after this balloon overflight starting in Montana last week, that the Pentagon's vigilance is up here.
Yeah, Kyle. I mean, the only thing we know for sure is that the Pentagon is not taking any chances anymore. They have clearly tightened up their procedures for handling these kinds of incidents. So we know, to the Pentagon's point, has said that the object was at 40,000 feet, which is low enough to potentially interfere with commercial air traffic, the size of a car, whereas the Chinese balloon had the payload the size of a regional jet, so a little bit smaller. The White House and Pentagon said that they became aware of it on Thursday night, and that F-22 aircraft went up and looked at it, made an assessment that it was unmanned, and that President Biden on Friday gave an order to shoot it down. We also know that the object landed on frozen water, which makes sense for Alaska in February. So that will hopefully mean that they can get to it and get some recovery going. They are still, for instance, the Chinese spy balloon that they shot down on February 4th is in about 47 feet of water off the coast of South Carolina. So those efforts have been ongoing. So far, there's really not a lot we know, and it's an object, not a balloon. We don't know where it came from, but there is now, as we can see, the Pentagon is not taking any chances, and I think we will learn more about this object, hopefully, and what exactly it was doing. Another detail that we know is that it wasn't maneuverable the way the balloon was, and it was ostensibly at the mercy of prevailing winds. But other than that, Kyle, a very curious case here, and we know that the Pentagon has said that they didn't reach out to their Chinese counterparts when they first spotted the object. So we don't know if there's been any further dialogue there, if they are operating under the assumption that this also originated in China. Really no details yet.
Meantime, we're learning more about the larger balloon that was downed on Monday. And listen to this clip. This is Joe Biden on Telemundo on Thursday explaining that in his view, that was not a major breach of U.S. security.
Intelligence gathering is going on by every country around the world is overwhelming. And the idea that a balloon could traverse, break American airspace is, anyway, it's not a major breach. I mean, look, it's a violation of international law. It's our airspace. And once it comes in our airspace, we can do what we want with it.
Kim, what do you make of this argument? We spy on them, they spy on us. There's a push and a pull here.
Come on. I mean, I was flabbergasted when I heard him say that this is just no big deal. You have to begin to wonder, what exactly does China have to do? I mean, what act would it have to take in order for us as something that puts us in conflict with them? And I think that that's the big point here about his comment is this administration seems so reticent to call China out. And he was in another interview, I noted, and he was asked, are we in conflict with China now? No, this is not a reason to be in conflict. Relations are normal. I've spoken with Xi in the past, I think he clarified. And then he said, look, we're just going to continue with our pursuit to compete with China. Well, competing with China is not really a foreign policy, a national security strategy. Okay. Those are two different things. Competing with China economically is very different than how we safeguard against China's aggression toward us, which it certainly seems as though the spy balloon was. And not just on us. We've also had briefings now that suggest they have an entire flotilla of these balloons, that they have put them out over 5 different continents in recent years. They believe that there have been at least 4 instances of them coming over the United States airspace previous to the one that was just shot down. This is a big deal. And I know the administration wants to make it go away and talk about other things because I think it's a little embarrassed. It should be, by its very delayed handling of this and the fact that despite we've had these balloons before, it did not seem to have a plan this time when one came across. So it would like to turn the subject. That may now become even harder if we learn and as we learn what this second object was and its intent.
What also undercuts the idea that this was not a threat, Kate, I think, is all of the things that we've learned about this big balloon since its downing. And I would guess that the U.S. officials now know more than even the public does, given that the Navy is busy fishing this stuff out of the Atlantic Ocean. But Kate, can you give us a sense of those details that have come out about what this balloon was really capable of?
Yeah, Kyle. I mean, for a while we were saying in our editorials that a reason why this balloon may present an advantage over satellites, and China has hundreds of satellites in low Earth orbit that can take pictures of the US, but why use a balloon instead of the satellite? Well, you can get closer pictures perhaps. The balloon may have an ability to hover over areas of interest. We know that Pentagon said the balloon has wanted to go over strategic sites, and we know it was near an intercontinental ballistic missile base in Montana. So the balloon may present some advantages there. We have learned that it was equipped with an antenna and that there was some sensor ability. The question is it picking up signals that don't reach satellites? That's another area where it might present an advantage over a satellite. But Kyle, I think we should dwell a little bit here on this bizarre remark here that the balloon didn't present a threat. I mean, so the Biden administration has been coming up with a lot of different explanations of why it didn't shoot down the balloon over the Aleutian Islands several days earlier. So they said, we saw this balloon coming. We didn't see some of these other balloon instances coming, and it's not obvious why they could see this one but not the other ones. But we didn't shoot it down over the Aleutian Islands. And in a Senate hearing this week on Capitol Hill, Pentagon officials said, well, one reason is that it would have been hard to recover the balloon from such deep waters, deep cold waters. But you have to weigh that against, Kyle, against the risk that this balloon came down in a populated part of the United States. The Pentagon said that they were operating under the assumption that this balloon could have explosives on board to detonate and implode itself on command. So that is an enormous risk that I think was really underappreciated here. And I don't really buy that the Biden administration was planning the whole time to shoot the balloon down. What it really looks like is that they only did so once the political blowback became so much so that they had to do it. So we will learn hopefully more about this balloon. The water that it's in off the coast is favorable, pretty shallow than you might expect. So hopefully we're able to recover as much of it as possible. I mean, the Pentagon also said that they were able to learn more about the balloon program by letting it overfly the U.S. And we know that some U-2 spy planes or some other U.S. assets accompanied it on the trip. But again, you have to weigh that learning opportunity against, one, the risk of it falling out of the sky, and two, just the message that it sends to China to allow the balloon to just complete its journey over the U.S. and exit before we bother to shoot it down. So those are some of the stressors there that I don't think we've gotten a lot of answers on. I would just add one other quick thing, which is there was a letter out of the Senate this week on the balloon from Senator Roger Wicker, who's the chair of the Armed Services Committee. And he was asking, for instance, what does NORTHCOM need to be able to reliably detect balloons like this? And what, for instance, have you asked for anything that we haven't funded? So I think that is another core question of this episode, is our detection capabilities and whether they're reliable enough for the kind of new evolving threats that we're facing.
To pick up on that point, the other piece of this episode that I think is amazing is the initial response from the Biden administration was that, well, there were balloons that flew over the U.S. during the Trump administration too. But as it turns out, those apparently were not detected, and those administration officials started saying that they had never heard of such a thing. And so there's a quote from the Air Force General of the Northern Command saying that this was a domain awareness gap, which, Kim, has to be one of the great all-time euphemisms. But I agree with Kate here that I think there's plenty of reason to be alarmed if there's stuff that's coming in from overseas floating over the United States, and the U.S. government is apparently not noticing until maybe months or years later.
Yeah, that is highly concerning. And I think it's one of the more concerning things to come out of this entire thing. Because again, we don't know what this balloon was doing, but there can't be anything that it was doing that was good. And you have to wonder, at least one possibility is that given that China had sent balloons across before, according to Pentagon officials now, maybe they were doing it precisely to see if they could get away with it again. And in that way, a kind of real trial balloon, meaning how many times can we do this? Because think about what kind of operational advantage that would give China in a scenario in which there was conflict between the two countries. Let's just say that China moves to do something in Taiwan and America decides to intercede on its behalf. I mean, it seems unlikely that China would actually attack the mainland of the United States, but the notion that it could just have balloons over the United States and that these had not been noticed before. So they could have been just seeing if they could get away with it again. And I think this goes back to Kate's point. I think one of the things that's very concerning about this is that it wasn't the White House that brought this to everyone's attention. It was people who saw this in Montana, and then they didn't have any choice but to fess up and explain that they apparently had been watching this one come in and hadn't done anything about it yet. And I think that's a bad public policy decision because people should be made aware of situations like this. They should understand the threat. It's an educational moment about what our adversaries are aiming at us. And I'm a little frustrated by how little has actually been said since. And so are members of Congress. I saw Ron Johnson on television. He received one of the briefings. He said on TV that he didn't really hear anything in that briefing that he didn't think couldn't be made public. And still protect national security. He felt instead as though he and members of Congress had been given the briefing in a classified setting specifically to keep them from being able to say much about this, lest they break classification rules. So I do think the White House still has a lot more it needs to complain about in terms of what it knows.